what is the state of the Lightning Network, and is that evolving constantly? And will that someday have its own DeFi components? Because the maximalists say it will, and one day all we'll need is Bitcoin. But I tend to also not necessarily believe that, and I don't really know what the state of that is. Are you up to speed with like the Lightning Network and Bitcoin Tech, et cetera? And you talked about this soft fork as well.
So I cover Lightning regularly in my research service, and I'm also pretty good friends with Elizabeth Stark, who's the CEO of Lightning Labs. They have the largest market share in Lightning implementation. Um, and so I'm very bullish on the Lightning Network. And so if we take a step back for a second, when we talked about these trade-offs with blockchains, right? So by adding features, you're sacrificing decentralization. There's basically two ways to solve that. One is you can just say we're gonna have less decentralization so we can do more, and we're gonna have kind of a federated chain or a semi-centralized chain. So if we acknowledge that obviously centralized databases have a purpose. So Amazon's centralized database has a purpose. And then we have Bitcoin, a fully decentralized database, has a purpose. So then the question becomes, can a blockchain in the middle have a purpose? Does a partially decentralized database have a purpose? And basically, Solana and Ethereum would essentially say yes, and that's what they're innovating towards. They're saying that we think a partially centralized, partially decentralized database has a purpose because you can do all sorts of things with it. It's auditable, and yet it's also more centralized so we can do more features. Now, the Bitcoin approach is instead to build in layers. So you say, okay, we have this rock solid, super simple foundation. And if you look at any monetary system in the world, they build over layers, right? So you have gold and you have say paper currency on top of gold, and then you have credit on top of that. And so Bitcoin is saying, okay, the base layer is not going to be super scalable. It's just going to be rock solid settlement security. And then on top of that, you can build all sorts of things. And so one of them, for example, is liquid, where you can lock Bitcoin into a basically peg it into the liquid network. It's a federation. So you make certain trade-offs, but then it becomes a lot faster. And so it can settle things, it can do more, you can have NFTs on it. And so it unlocks Bitcoin onto this higher frequency state, you can call it. So you're sacrificing a little bit of that security, a little bit of that decentralization for more features while still being pegged to Bitcoin. Lightning is a similar approach in the sense that it's built on top of Bitcoin. So smart contracts, very simple smart contracts, allow you to open channels. And when we think about, when we send payments, if I send you money, we don't want to broadcast that to the world, right? So blockchains broadcast everything to everybody. So that's inherently doesn't scale very well. There's no reason why if I pay for coffee that the entire world should know about it. Even if they don't know who I am by my address, they don't need to know that this address paid this address, the entire world. And so Lightning says, okay, so in addition to that underlying broadcast settlement layer, we're going to have direct channel to channel payment connections in here. And so it's kind of like you open this tab, like a bar tab, and instead of, paying for every individual beer, if you're buying beer for your friends at the bar, instead of paying for every one, you open a tab with a bartender, you collateralize it. So no one's trusting anyone else because unlike a bartender, you actually have code to enforce this, and it's collateralized. And you basically do a lot of transactions, and they can settle it back on the base layer at any time. So you can do 100 transactions and then settle it at the end of the month or whatever. And so, and in addition, you can do things like if I have a tab open with the bartender and someone else doesn't, she can talk to me and say, hey, can you just get me a beer and I'll pay you back. So basically, she's using my tab with the bartender, and then we're connecting through there. And so that's how the Lightning Network works. And back in, it was conceived in 2015, 2016. It was implemented in 2018, early 2018 for the beta. And for a while, it was like a slow growing thing because it's really about the network effect and liquidity. But one argument that I've been making since early 2021, like January, was that it's finally hitting critical mass. So the liquidity is sufficient that you can actually reliably send payments on it, and you're getting adoption from exchanges and other things like that. And of course, a few months later, in the middle of the year, we had El Salvador, announce that they're going on, they've made it legal tender Bitcoin. And even though we call it Bitcoin, they're heavily using the Lightning Network. I mean, a lot of their implementations based around Lightning. So the Chivo wallet, and also the open source wallets that people can get there. A lot of that is based on Lightning. And so it's kind of showing that you can do these very fast, very secure payments on top of Bitcoin rather than relying on Bitcoin's base layer. So I'm quite bullish on it. And over the long term, I think that when you look at Liquid, when you look at Rootstock, which is another DeFi aspect on top of Bitcoin, and when you look at Lightning, I think we're going to see increasing probably DeFi on that platform. But it's also important to realize that because the Bitcoin culture is less about speculating and less about yield and more about, say, the sound money approach, I think it's going to be inherently less financialized, right? So those things will exist there, but I think the question is, will they become as big as you see on the other chains, which kind of prioritize them?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in finance for 15 years. It's almost like finance kind of needs to be around currency as opposed to digital gold or digital property, as Saylor would call Bitcoin. So I see what you're saying. It's all, you might expect the finance to be around the stable coins and develop faster there than, say, on the Bitcoin. But we'll have to see with some of these protocols.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you're more centralized, you can iterate faster. Um, and whereas with Bitcoin, because the base layer is very secure and it changes slowly, a lot of that innovation happens on higher layers. And so the last major Bitcoin update was 2017 SegWit, and the one that's coming out now is called Taproot, and that implements new encryption methods that people can opt into. So it's not forced on them. It's a soft fork, so they can opt into it, and that actually empowers Lightning. So it makes Lightning far more useful in particular, but it also it just kind of makes the whole blockchain more efficient. And the reason that kind of thing wasn't implemented in the beginning was that it had just kind of come out, I think, when Bitcoin was invented. It wasn't battle tested yet. I think it might have been patented, for example. But over time, that type of encryption is now more understood, and so that's another way to improve Bitcoin. So Bitcoin basically changes very slowly on the base layer, and we see a lot of the innovation happening in the higher layers. In addition, you see innovation in other spaces. So, for example, a lot of the hardware improvements have been on the Bitcoin side, right? So there are wallets like Trezor or Ledger that they hold multiple tokens, but then Bitcoin also goes further with like Bitcoin only wallets that have more features, and then also Bitcoin only multi-signature solution because it's this kind of collateral asset sound money approach. There's a lot more focus on security and custodianship for it. And so there's more innovation in that space. So there's kind of different areas of emphasis for innovation on these blockchains.